Hi, it's Richard here from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting with another in our series about the example projects which are provided with Oracle Policy Modeling. This time around, we're going to be looking at the DMV Document Guide project. So this is one of the more complete projects provided in the sense that it is a well-documented and well-implemented interview with plenty of cool features that we're going to look at, both from a learning perspective, but also in the idea that you may need to demonstrate this. So what are the things that you could choose to modify or enhance in some way to improve your demo? So the first thing I will talk about is, of course, the interview itself. So the interview itself is all about applying for a driver's license or an ID card in the United States of America and understanding what documents you need to bring to the DMV when you apply for the driver's license. And the idea of the project is that by entering information about the documents that you have, you will be told ahead of time whether the documents you have are sufficient to obtain a federally approved driver's license or identification card or some other form of identification. So that's the basic principle of the interview. The interview itself has a couple of neat features, or these features that you may not be familiar with if you're learning Oracle Intelligent Advisor. The first is that it's using the left-hand side navigation. So if we go over to the Styles options in the Interview tab, you will see, first of all, that the layout has been quite significantly changed. And down here on the navigation strip, you'll see that it's choosing left menu as opposed to the three other choices, which all involve some form of display at the top of the page. This is because this particular interview has a custom header, the kind of frame of which you can see right here. You can see there's a picture of a car. Now this car is going to be animated during the interview, and it's going to drive across the top of the screen as you advance through the stages. We'll look at how that's done, and we'll look at also the kind of thing that you can do with a custom header. So I would recommend that for now you leave it as left menu, although later on if you want to experiment you could switch it to a top ribbon and you'll get a bunch of warnings relating to accessibility. That's because there's an accessibility warning level trigger here in the options, so I'm going to set that to none for the time being, just to remove those warnings. And you'll notice that the display has changed. So if, as opposed to having the left-hand side stage list, we now have it at the top of the page. Whilst that is interesting, it does provide for a slightly different look and feel, and you can still see here that the custom header is above this section. So what else are we here to talk about? Well, let's close the debugger for a section and let's move on to the first practical page, or rather the first practical screen. There are a couple of things that you're probably going to want to do. First of all, you'll notice here that we have the date of birth which is chosen, and this is an attribute called the date of birth, and it's a date attribute. There are currently no minimum and maximum implied in here, so you may wish to, for example, at the very least, put in some basic sort of, I don't know, given that I'm writing this interview in March of 2022, and we could enter a nice little error message to say something like, please enter a valid birth date. So we could customize the entering of the date of birth, and you'll also see here that we have chosen to display it as a month, day, year. If you wanted to, you could demonstrate the fact that settings such as this are related to the region that you are currently running the interview in. So for the purposes of a demonstration, I will change it to United Kingdom English. We'll have a warning that this may affect rules, and of course it could do because there are separators that may be changed. And we could go to the date of birth, and we could say, well, we're actually going to display it as a multi-input text, so day, month, and year. And if I now switch back to my United Kingdom and change it back to United States and click OK, you'll notice that it's reverted to month, day, and year. So using something like the multi-input text and changing the project region is a great way of explaining to people that we handle the concept of region-sensitive data, and if you change the region or if you need to do it in a specific region, the region effect is instantaneous. You don't have to do any complicated customization. It knows which date formats are related to which region. This initial page collects the first, middle, and last name of the individual, and this information is used in many other pages. For example, if I enter first, middle name, and last name here, when I go further down into the interview and I look at the social security number, you'll see 3 similar fields which are used to display the first, middle, and last name for this particular document that I'm about to select. So each of these has a dynamic default. So the dynamic default, as you can see, is the person's first name on the identity document. What that basically means is this information on the first useful screen is used as dynamic default elsewhere. Perhaps the demonstration is in order. So I'll reset that, go straight in, and say my first name and my middle name and my month, date, and well, let's try and trick it first of all. So our new validation on the date is there. So I've entered my first, middle, and last name, and now you'll see that it's repeated on each of these pages as I go through the process of selecting the documents that I intend to bring. The idea is that if, let's say, I'm presenting my passport, but on my passport, my middle name is actually printed as Alex, well, this can be used to detect whether there is an incoherence and whether that's likely to cause a problem between your actual name and the name that is printed on a document. You know, if I have a utility bill, it might be that my middle name doesn't appear at all. So these are receiving my data as dynamic defaults. What we could do is, for the purposes of a demonstration, is take one of those secondary pages, doesn't really matter which one it is because they all have the same basic layout. So we could go to one of these follow-up pages that repeats this information through the dynamic default. And I'm also going to go to the initial page and find the attribute that was used here. So I'm going to call this the initial middle name. So that when I go to, for example, the page in relation to an identity document, what I could do here is demonstrate something called the hint text. You'll see that there's a hint text here. It's that kind of faded gray text you get on many websites when you're required to enter some information. And I could, for example, here, in this particular attribute, in this particular control, you'll see that I have hint text called select. I could type in, please select a document, and I could use the percentage sign to go and grab the first name or even the middle name, or both for that matter. So when I run the interview, and I'll restart the interview so we get to play with it from start to finish. So we'll put in Richard Alexander Napier. And you'll notice that on the identity page, we have please select a document, Richard Alexander. So it's another way to leverage the attributes that were entered on the first page. That's a little more friendly. Well, I wouldn't necessarily put the middle name as well as the first name. The next thing we're going to look at is we're going to take a quick look at the end of the interview. So I'm going to go ahead and fill out that I have a passport, and that I also have a social security card, and that I have a utility bill, and I also have a tax form, all of which has the same first, middle, and last name. So frankly, I am definitely going to get a positive response because all my documentation is using the same first name, middle name, and last name. While we're here, you'll see one of the reasons why I don't necessarily recommend that you change from a side stage layout to a top stage layout is that now the interview becomes a little longer, so I have to scroll up and down to show you what's going on. But we'll go back and change that in just a minute. There are a couple of things that I want to show here. First of all is we have the explanation showing all of the details as to why I have satisfied the documentation requirements for a federally compliant driver's license or identification card, and we can drill down into all of the detail. And we can see here, for example, that we have your name is compatible with the name on the social security number document because your first, middle name, and so on, because basically I have the correct, I have the same name as on my original screen. But frankly, this is far too much information. So I want to trim this explanation to reveal something a little less, well, verbose. To do that is really simple. We're going to investigate a couple of features that you may or may not know. We're going to go into the Data tab, and we're going to look at attributes relating to the person's name is compatible with the name on the something something document. So I'm going to use the SSN document as my demonstration. So at the moment, when I enter this attribute, you'll see down here a button called explanation options. So that's how is this button going to behave, how is this attribute going to behave when it's displayed as an explanation. At the moment, there are no options triggered. So I'm going to, for example, say that I want to make it silent. I'm going to return to my debugger, and I'm going to turn to my explanation. And you'll notice that now your name is compatible with the name on the SSN document. I don't have all of that long explanation. So I'm going to now do the same. In fact, there were both of them. Let's say that this one is silent too, as is this one. So now when I show the details and I go to compatibility, I have a nice trimmed drop-down without what, in this case, we've decided is unnecessary explanation. So it's a good way to demonstrate how you can modify the behavior of the explanation without having to go through any process of rewriting rules or making complicated decisions. It's just using the options on the relevant attributes. Another feature that you might wish to do is in relation to this entire block here, the documentation requirements for a federally compliant driver's license or identification card. So let's go to the final screen where this is displayed, and you'll notice here that it's mentioning reference tags are visible. So let's choose, first of all, we're going to add a reference tag. The on-off switch is up here, by the way. So we need to talk about reference tags because they can be very useful in the debug phase, but also as a demonstration of how you can kind of connect what you're doing in Oracle policy modeling to existing source material. This rule is right-click, and I can find the rule. So I'm going to go and open it in Microsoft Word, and I'm going to add a reference tag. To add a reference tag, I just put my cursor at the start of the line and click the Add Tag button. A reference tag is really entirely up to me or you, so I'm going to pretend this is Article 2, Paragraph 3, Alinea 1. So it's a legal reference to some document or other. It doesn't matter what it is, I'm just demonstrating. So I'm going to validate this, and there are several reasons why I like reference tags, especially during the debugging phase of a project. First of all, now you can see that I have a reference to my legal document showing here. If I click on it in the debugger, I will return in the document, in Word, to wherever the reference is. So that could be super useful. I will also see it if I start looking at it in the other pages of the debugger. So this is federally compliant driver's license. So let's go federally compliant driver's license. I think that's the one. Yeah, and I can also see it in the Decision tab of the debugger, which can make it very easy to, for example, if I was to go back into my Word document, just for the purposes of kind of highlighting what this might be used for. But let's say that this isn't a legal document, this is user story number 1. So this can be very useful for tracing work that's been done by somebody else, work that's been done in your team, and it could be used as a marker for tracking changes that have been made, user stories in your Agile project, or bug numbers, or whatever it is. And of course, you can switch them off here in the debugger as well. So reference tags are a great way to demonstrate the flexibility of linking your Oracle policy modeling work to source materials such as legal documents or user stories. The next thing we're going to look at in this demonstration is, of course, something that we've touched on before. In the interview, you'll notice that in this explanation, for example, it says, the person has satisfied the documentation requirements. And yet, in the debugger, it says, you have satisfied the documentation requirements. So this is a substitution using the second person. So in the project language subtab, you'll notice it says enable second person substitutions using the person, which is enabling us to use things like you, your. And in the data tab, if we take a look at the person, we'll see here that we have substitution enabled, it's personal, and we are also collecting the person's gender. So that's how the you is displaying in the interview. If I disable it temporarily, you'll notice that it says Richard has satisfied the documentation. Let's re-enable it, and let's choose the person. And it returns to the second person, you. The final thing we're going to demonstrate or talk about today in this project is, of course, the dynamic driving car, I'm getting it to do the reverse here, that appears in the header. So we're not going to talk in detail about what a custom header is. We're simply going to highlight a couple of things and give you some ideas for where you could go with this. First of all, this is an example of a JavaScript extension. If you're interested in JavaScript extensions, on our site you'll find a number of videos and a gazillion demonstrations of different JavaScript extensions that you can make. This is a header extension, so each extension has its own job. So this is a header extension, and it is provided in the project and takes the form of a JavaScript file that looks like this. So without going into too much detail, we can see that this is a custom header, and it has two keys, a mount and an update. Mount is where all of the basic layout is created, and you'll notice that we have append child. So this is actually where HTML gets put on the page. There are some specifics related to displaying images in a mobile device. So that's why you have a Windows universal Windows program set background image specific function. Otherwise, you have a bunch of functions for appending the image. And then in the update, of course, as you'd expect, depending on your position in the interview, recall that an interview is built out of stages and each stage has screens, we are going to calculate your position. So if there are 5 stages, well, then we know there are 5 steps to reach the end of your interview. And the interview then calculates the position of the car and animates the car moving from the previous position to the new position. Obviously, the update fires whenever anything changes, but the animation will only move us, of course, when we change from one stage to the next. So this is how a custom header is built. As a simple example, what else could you use a custom header for? Well, you could use a custom header for examining how long users spend in the interview, or for that matter, printing pretty pictures. I'm just going to go show you one quick example of what you might do in a custom header, or rather just to show you the basic principle of the header. I'm going to use something called the code generator, which is a project that we have, which allows me to quickly generate some custom code. So I'm going to generate a custom header, call it my extension. And this is a kind of boilerplate custom header extension. I'm going to copy and paste the whole thing and replace the existing code with this. And you'll see that we have, again, we have a mount and an update. And in this case, all it's doing is it's going to calculate the time elapsed. How long have you spent in the interview? And that is going to be the entire contents of the header. So when we now debug the interview, the car has disappeared, and we now have an idea of how long we are currently in the interview. There's also this pink area here, which is kind of like the debug window. This is because I've been debugging and sending messages to the console. So I'll just remove those for the purposes of our little demo. And I'll refresh the page. So now as I progress through the interview, we'll see that it's keeping track of how long I've spent in the interview. And I'm spending a reasonable amount of time. So it took me 15.8 seconds to reach the end of the interview. Now, obviously, I was cheating because all of the data was already entered, but simple stuff like this might give me an idea of whether I'm going to reach the target of making an interview that is extremely simple for the user, that they can navigate in just a few seconds. I'm, of course, going to return to the original code here and remove my demonstration and simply put back the existing one. There are plenty of things you could do with this particular demonstration. You could, for example, look to use a different graphic. This is actually and you can see on line 55 that we have the car image path. So we're going to go ahead and change that car image to a different car. Go to the Styles dialog, go to Custom Files, go to the Images folder, and this is where we'll find the original images, namely the background with the clouds, the white image of the car, and we could add, white image of a train, or a black image of a train, or indeed any other vehicle that we chose to use. So given that it's a blue background, the train in white will work quite well. So we can simply go ahead and change the file name to train white and go ahead and debug to apply those changes. So now we have ourselves a train instead of a vehicle. Now, obviously, the point being is that you could customize this to match whatever kind of transport company or organization you were working with. So that just about rounds it up for our review of the DMV document guide, and I hope that it's been useful to you. If there's anything else that you would like to see in the next example project video, then please go ahead and leave a comment, and we'll try and work it in. In the meantime, see you soon.